First up, when it comes to WordPress and page speed, you've got to look at what the options are for making better choices in the first place. So if you really had the opportunity to go back in time and use your magic wand and I guess start all over again on a WordPress website, what are the choices you could make that could make it a much faster and more successful website? Well, the first thing to look at is fast web hosting. And fast web hosting is delivered by choosing not the cheapest option, but obviously something that's you get what you pay for. So looking for something that's a little bit, not so much pricey, but feature packed. And when I say feature packed, I'm not talking about bells and whistles. I'm talking about the features that matter most with web hosting. And that is when it's in an Australian location, or at least that it's using mirrors of your website or copies of your website and spreading them all across the internet as a CDN or content delivery network. So Australian content delivery network locations that are close to where your customers are, and Australian locations good as well. Although this is all very much in case you are trying to reach just an Australian market. If you're looking to reach a worldwide market, then that content delivery network being in Australia and also in other countries where your customers may be begins to be a much more important factor. And something that's universal, doesn't matter where you are, is that your web host has the latest technical stack. That will make a bit more sense in just a moment. So we're looking at Australian hosting, primarily looking at, I guess, your business that wants to reach customers that are in either in your local area or somewhere in Australia. That could be across Brisbane, Perth, Darwin, Alice Springs, anywhere in Australia as a local area. But also if your customers are all over the place. If they're sitting in South Australia, Tasmania, Sydney, Melbourne, the whole of Northern Australia, the East Coast, the West Coast, the South Coast, the North Coast, doesn't matter where they are, you want to reach them wherever they are. And the reason you would use Australian hosting is because there are less interconnect points between you and your customers. Let's just say you've got a website that is hosted in Ukraine. So that's nothing wrong with Ukraine web hosting if your customers were in Eastern Europe or Russia. They're very, very close to that server hosting. And so there's not many jumps, not many points that your data has to go through to get to that customer. But if you're located in Australia and your customers are located in Australia, then having Ukraine web hosting means that there's dozens of jumps that data has to do through lots of different cables, lots of different interconnect points to get that website through to your customers. So having Australian hosting means it's so much easier for you to be able to reach your customers as fast as possible using, I guess, a point of presence for your website that's in the same place as where your customers happen to be. The other advantage we've got, of course, with Australian hosting is you get really good quality support in local time. Now, how important is that? You won't notice it until you have to use it. And if you ever had to use support from a web host and your web host support is in Europe or America, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Whilst their business hours may be great for them, unless they've got 24/7 support, you're kind of a little bit stuck in Australia as being completely out of their time zone. So what we recommend is that Australian hosting gives you Australian support hours as well. Now, most of these are open 24/7, but it's a bit of a skeleton staff overnight, and it may be acknowledged but not actioned until the next morning. The Australian hosting points are generally best served when they're in places like Sydney, Perth, and soon in Darwin as well. The reason for this is that the internet pipes that come into Australia, so the cables, the international interconnect cables that come into Australia, most of them, the vast majority of them come in through Sydney. There's plans to have them coming in other places, but Sydney is the place where they come through. There's none that go in through Melbourne except for the Basslink cable that goes to Tasmania. But just about all of them come into Sydney. There are some that come into Perth, though, and very soon there's going to be two coming into Darwin, and I'm told one also in Maroochydore in southeast Queensland on the Sunshine Coast. So that means that there's going to be a few less hops that they have to take. So therefore, the data centers that are serving your data and that are serving your websites are either going to be in Sydney, Perth, Darwin, or Maroochydore from the near future. Right now, just about all of them are based in Sydney. Some are based in Perth, though. So if you use some Australian web hosting, such as Venture IP, SiteGround, and Digital Pacific, they place your data in Sydney. And in case of Digital Pacific, I think they've also got a mirror in Brisbane and another one in Perth. So when it comes to the location of your server in Australia, it's not quite so important or vital to be in the same city unless you've got huge uptime and availability requirements for millions and millions of visitors every day. It's not really a big deal, but it is a big deal when it comes to the difference between hosting your data on your website in Australia or hosting it somewhere in Europe, particularly because our interconnect with Europe is actually quite poor, or in America, where even though we've got good connection with them, it's still nowhere near as good as having that connection here within Australia. Next up, we then look at the factor with content delivery networks. Now, what is a content delivery network? A little bit of a harder one to work out. Content delivery networks basically deliver a copy of your website. So they cache your pages and put it in lots of different servers around the world. For an example, Jetpack, Cloudflare, and Bunny.net don't just put your website in Australia, they will put it in several locations in Australia. So far, they are serving the whole of the East Coast. So you've got Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, in some cases, Canberra, and in the Gold Coast as well. Then as you move across, they've also got presences in Adelaide and in Perth as well. So all of these have a presence there. So for instance, if I was hosting my website in Sydney, but I am in Perth, I would be viewing a version of that website which has been downloaded from Perth. So it would be much, much faster if my site was mirrored through bunny.net or Cloudflare or Jetpack, where all these places seem to have they have locations of their servers in those places. Now that's to make it faster, to make it easier for your data, for your website to be viewed and much faster across the internet, rather than having to go back to your website hosting all the time, which just causes you to have a whole lot of extra data use and bandwidth use, which of course you've only got a limited amount with when you have web hosting. So if you want to be able to avoid excess charges for that, it can be really helpful to have your hosting backed up by a content delivery network. And this is particularly valid for WordPress, which can have some fairly bloated and slow pages on it. Then when we come to the technical stack, this is where we decide that whether you need particular technical requirements with your web host to serve a good website quickly. And that technical stack will involve PHP, which is the language that the website's written in, of version 7.4 or 8. 8 is a little bit not correct with when it comes for a lot of very new websites that have old plugins in them. So some of those old plugins and themes may not work correctly with PHP 8 right now, but PHP 7.4 is the current supported version. So you should be running that regardless of your website being old. Nginx and Lightspeed are the best server software as opposed to Apache because they're much faster, they can handle a lot more, and they're generally these days used mostly in web hosting environments rather than Apache, but it's worth checking. And then having something like cPanel or an alternative like cPanel with your web host. So for instance, in Venture IP that I use quite extensively across my clients, they have a cPanel interface, which is allows you to interact with things like setting up your email addresses, your file manager for your website files, some setup options for WordPress and other systems, and I guess places where you can make the changes to your PHP setting as far as the modules that add extra capability to your web service, or the version of it, say 7.4 or 8, depending on what kind of website you've got and how able it is to be able to handle new versions of that software. I'll have a bit more on this a bit later on because it does sound like technical gobbledygook when you just brush over it like this. So I promise you it will be made a lot clearer soon. The other thing you want your web host to have is great backups. If they don't do backups, just leave them. It's not worthwhile. Relying upon you and your WordPress plugins like Backup Buddy or any of those other services that do it within WordPress is not the way to do backups. You want to know that your web host has those backed up so you can attach them and get them restored, or whatever you need to do, restore them or download them really quickly and really easily. And trusting a WordPress plugin is just like trusting the 18-year-old next door to look after your house when you go on holidays. It might work, it might not, but if things do go very wrong, they go terribly, terribly wrong. So rely upon your web host, not on your WordPress plugins to do those backups. And make sure that it's a nightly backup. All the quality web hosts that I work with, SiteGround, Venture IP, Digital Pacific, they all do nightly backups. I go over to some of the cheaper versions that I've used, like Fast Comet and some others, and they don't unless you set it up, which is just ridiculous. We all should have nightly backups, regardless of what the web hosting service is. So make sure that we're able to have those nightly backups simply by using a better web host that does it for you. And then ensure that your web host is actually doing. Check them once every so often just to see if there are some backups that are already set up. When we look at monitoring, this is another important aspect of you knowing whether your site is up and down and how reliable that website is. It's important for you to not only understand the reliability of the website, but for it to be reliable in the first place. I can tell you now, there is almost daylight between the most reliable web hosts and the others. I use a $4 a month web hosting service for multiple staging sites. It's located in the UK. And at that price, I expect that I'm not going to get a great service. It goes down all the time. The software's never updated as quick as I'd like it to be. So the monitoring side of things becomes important. So you need to take some kind of level of that on yourself. How do you do that? With systems, of course. I'm not expecting you to go in there every 60 seconds, look at your website to see if it's up. You've got systems for that. The Jetpack system, which is free with WordPress, it's actually a WordPress official plugin. When you put that in there, it's got a monitoring service. It will check with the website every 60 seconds to make sure that your website is still up. Then there's WPMU Dev, which is the stack that I use. This particular system allows us to be able to monitor hundreds and hundreds of websites all over the country and all over the world, which gives us a really good insight into what websites are up, down, what their performance is like, and also doing things as fancy as keeping plugins, themes, and the WordPress core files up to date. So there's no chance that hackers will get in. There's no opportunity for vulnerabilities to be exposed and taken advantage of. So we use WPMU Dev. It's a little on the expensive side. I'll warn you about that. But gosh, it does a great job. And it also handles our backups if we need a third measure of backups as well. Manage WP is also a very, very good system, a lot less expensive than WPMU Dev, with a few less features as well. But what it does allow you to do is monitor various sites. It doesn't have to be just one. You can monitor all your different sites. And it will also go so far as helping you to manage the plugins, the themes, and the core updates that come through from WordPress. So it'll tell you when they're due, give you an opportunity to hit one button, and it'll then be able to load them up. Jetpack, though, for monitoring is more than enough to monitor whether your site's alive or not. But when it comes to doing extended things like updating theme files and updating your core files and updating your plugin files, then you might want something a bit more robust like WPMU Dev or Manage WP. When it comes to your themes, we tend to choose themes that we like the look of, but we don't tend to choose themes based on much else but how pretty they are, which leads us into a few problems, particularly if the developer doesn't update their themes very often. If they let old versions of their themes sit around for too long, that they require a particular kind of PHP on the server or a particular kind of server configuration to be present. And then when that updates and becomes no longer supported, those themes will fall down and parts of your website are just not going to work. So updates and frequent updates from developers when WordPress has a security update, when different plugins have security updates, when your web server software that you won't even know is having an update, then you'll be able to be really, really comfortable in the knowledge that your site will continue to look great year after year after year because they're sending through those updates. Now, if you're not actually doing those updates, even though they're sending them through, You're leaving yourself very vulnerable. So get those updates done and only work with theme providers that provide a record of lots of updates. And if you're getting it from someone like Theme Forest or Elegant Themes, they have change logs that will tell you how often they've made changes to their themes. Theme developers and page builder developers that are constantly providing fresh updates are the best ones to use because you know that your website will be safe for years to come. Now, the other thing I would really suggest you do for the sake of making sure that your themes are fast is to read the reviews. I have a number of clients who like to use Avada themes. Unfortunately, Avada are not very good at page speed when it comes to their themes. Their themes are very heavily and loaded with very pretty stuff, lots of animations, lots of slideshows, all that sort of good stuff. The problem is, though, that all that stuff adds to the bloat, which slows down the website. So when the website's slower, your rank on Google is going to be lower. So if you want to get a better rank on Google, you need to have themes that are light and breezy and able to upload quickly. There's several ways we'll look at a little bit later in this webinar that will lead you to how to do that. But the first step is always read the reviews, see what the users have to say about page speed. Look at that, what they have to say about why is this running so slow, or support requests. Support forums are a great source of information when it comes to how these themes work in the real world. And yes, they look pretty, but that's only part of the issue. What you also need is for those things to be given a technical look as well by someone who's actually using those themes in the real world, not just the demo version that the theme or page builder developer has put on their site. The third theme consideration you need to make is that most themes these days are not built as themes as much as they're built as page builders. They're using plugins such as Beaver Builder or Elementor, or themes such as Divi that allow you to build essentially your own layout, or to work with other layouts that allow you then to drag and drop elements in and out of the page or the post to make it just look better. Now, these page builders have changed everything. I work with them every day, particularly with Divi and Elementor, and a little bit with Avada and with WP Bakery Composer as well, Page Composer as well. Not all page builders are equal, and I'll be looking at that a little bit later as well, so you can choose a page builder that works best for you. My recommendation isn't necessarily the fastest thing. It's for the one that allows me to build better sites faster, but it may not be the fastest loading. But there's ways around that with other tools, and we'll explain that soon as we get to that section. Now, the page builders include Avada, WP Bakery Page Builder, which is often just called Page Builder these days. Elementor is incredibly popular, probably the number one. Divi, which is probably about number two, and then Beaver Builder, which is becoming increasingly more prominent and important in there. Now, these page builders allow you to either build themes of your own, such as in Divi, you can build your own pages. Elementor, you can build your own pages, or they come with built-in theme libraries. So Divi, for instance, you install Divi as a theme and it gives you access to hundreds of different page layouts and dozens of different overall website layouts for every kind of page you can think of, from the about page to the pricing page to the blog page to the home page and even landing pages. So what all these have in common is that they have the potential to slow down your website. Whilst they are great tools and they've really, really revolutionized the speed at which we're able to build websites, their problem is that, well, some of them slow down your website quite considerably. So if I look at a comparison now in the ease of use, Divi is by far the easiest to use, and it's an elegant and beautiful solution for building websites. Avada, not so great. WP Bakery, yeah, not so great. Elementor is a little bit technical, and you have to have an understanding of lots of different WordPress concepts to use it well, but once it's in, it's great to use. Beaver Builder is remarkably easy to use as well. Again, they've taken the sort of approach of Beaver that Divi's taken, and they've decided to create something which is it's a joy to use and really interesting and fun to use as well. So depending on what you're going to do, it can come down to ease of use and the lack of a learning curve. If you really don't want much of a learning curve, Divi's great. If you want more of a learning curve and you're willing to attack things that are a bit more granular, then your Avadas, Bakeries, and Elementors are very good for that as well. But the next screen tells a different story. And this is the speed, the access to support. Now, Divi and Beaver are paid. Elementor has a free version. So the support's not so great. Avada and WP Bakery are largely delivered through ThemeForest, which is Envato, which is like a third-party company that resells a lot of this stuff. So it can be difficult to find really good support for Avada and WP Bakery, but Elementor has quite good support. It's just that there is a free version and there is a paid version. So in the paid version, obviously the support is miles ahead of what the free version is. But when it comes to Divi, it is a paid thing anyway. There's only a paid version of Divi. You can build your own pages with the basic Divi builder, but to get the plugin or the theme to go in, you kind of need to go through a paywall to buy it. So I could give you a copy of that, and you could build pages from scratch, but you wouldn't be able to access all the library of pre-built pages that the paid version can get. Same with Beaver Builder, a very similar thing. So they've got excellent access to support. This next one, though, tells a different story in terms of the page speed. So Avada has been really bashed a lot lately for being really slow when it comes to page loading speed, which is vital to consider when you're in this world of what is called the Web Core Vitals, which are part of Google's way of ranking your website. They want to look at the Web Core Vitals are basically all about how quick do certain things happen on your website, such as the ability to be able to respond to a request to load the site, then the speed at which the site responds, and then the speed at which the first, what they call the contentful paint. So there's content is painted, and then content is usable, and then the whole thing is loaded. The quicker all those things happen, the better you're going to rank. So as we've been looking at different web hosts, now we look at the WordPress page builders that make that more possible. Avada is very, very slow on this. They are not getting any better. In fact, they seem to be getting worse. Elemental sites have been becoming exceedingly slow lately as well, which is a bit of a concern because they used to be one of the ones that were a shining star about how light their pages were. WP Bakery is better than Elemental when it comes to loading. They've had a lot of improvements. Divi has had a lot of improvements as well. They're certainly better than Elementor and way better than Avada at the moment. Divi used to be super slow, bloated pages, slow to load. They've increased the efficiency of the way they store their code, and they've increased the speed at which their pages can be rendered on a web browser much, much more in the last year. So it's been a significant improvement. Otherwise, Divi was once upon a time way down the bottom. It was the slowest in page loading in every single scenario. And then with Beaver Builder, they've become remarkably quick. They've built this particular version of the page builder, which is out of the box, really quick to load your pages. All of these, though, pale in comparison to a less commonly used page builder called Oxygen. Oxygen is not on this list because it's got a bit more of a learning curve. It's a lot harder to use. So Oxygen isn't on this list for those reasons, yet it would probably outdo Beaver Builder and Bakery and Divi by almost 2 times. Those pages are so much faster to load, to the point where I'm actually considering learning more about Oxygen Page Builder so that I can start to use it for more of my clients' websites, because it's that much quicker and a much better technology, but it is harder to learn how to use it. So for a small business, you may need said, a bit of a brain space here for you. Most of your page speed issues caused by what we call the page builders can be offset by using tools like minification of your code and the use of content delivery networks to deliver those pages for you. So if you're using a CDN like Cloudflare, Jetpack, or Bunny.net, then you've got the ability to be able to deliver your things much quicker anyway. So you don't have to worry quite so badly about the weaknesses of various page builders between one and the other. Then the takeaways for this section, then we're talking about web hosting being incredibly important. We also talked about understanding the technology and understanding the stack that they're using, the stack being the collection of different tools they use to build their web hosting platform and deliver your websites to the world. And you also need to understand the impact of themes to slow down your pages and page builders as well. In the next one, we're going to be looking more into some of the things you can do on page to do better on Google, but also to just have a faster loading WordPress page.